Over the next days, the Council decided to take Qui-Gon's evidence seriously, and with the Temple's technicians deciphering Gunray's Mechno-Chair, they found incriminating discussions of Sidious and the Neimoidian talking about eliminating Senator Amidala of Iago. Though Qui-Gon was aware of the current Sith hierarchy, he wanted to see if the Jedi were willing to accept that the Sith even existed, and soon Yoda dispatched Jedi to worlds that Qui-Gon had visited. Though somewhat pleased that the Jedi had chosen to act, the introduction of the Jedi meant that the start of the war would happen sooner than later, and Qui-Gon returns to Sereno to discuss the part of the plan with Dooku. The Separatist leader chooses this moment to reveal that before he left the Jedi, he had talked to Sifo Dyas about raising a clone army on Kamino, but this would have to be approved by the Supreme Chancellor. Neglecting to tell Qui-Gon about the true meaning of the clone army in the event that it was required, he proposed that the next step was to try and block Palpatine from gaining further power before getting the Jedi to arrest him. Qui-Gon knew the Jedi would have to move quickly before Sidious sensed their intentions, and asked Dooku to deploy a small battalion of battle droids, which were not a part of the main army, but showed that the Separatists posed a threat. The first Jedi to encounter the droid army happened to be Qui-Gon's old Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi on the planet of Geonosis. Even though the droids were no match for his lightsaber abilities, he was shocked to find an entire droid factory hidden amongst the rocks, and reported his findings to the Jedi Council. With the knowledge that the Separatists were establishing their own army, Qui-Gon instructed Padme to reveal that she had survived the Separatist attack by returning to Coruscant and addressing the Senate. When the Angels descended on the galactic capital, the planet's citizens and political guests were in shock at the survival of Padme, and she increased the drama of her entrance in the Senate chamber by shifting her pod to the centre of the arena. Addressing the entire Senate, she pointed to Palpatine and asked him to explain why he had not taken more active measures to counter the growing threat. Comparing him to Valorum, it was actually the work of Qui-Gon and Padme which had forced Palpatine to be more passive, as he didn't have the support of his corrupt allies. As murmurs of agreement to Padme's statement echoed through the chamber, Palpatine's eyes narrowed, and he knew he should have been more thorough in eliminating Iago's senator, but he had yet to deploy his secret weapon. When it was his turn to speak, Palpatine tried to diffuse the voices of discontent in his direction by acknowledging some of his passive measures, before he then proposed the creation of a new army. Padme was relieved that she had addressed the Senate first, as a chorus of discontent echoed through the Senate, brandishing him a warmonger. This was not the response that Palpatine had anticipated, as he thought he had sufficient support for what he called the Military Creation Act, so now they would need more direct persuasion. Before his reputation diminished any further, the Supreme Chancellor called for the session to a temporary end, and pretending to go to the 500 Republica in his apartment, he instead disguised himself as a Senate guard. Observing a group of the senators surrounding Senator Amidala, the Sith Lord used his mind to corrupt them with the dark side, and slowly turn them to his will. The change in the mood of the senators and their sudden lack of energy was not lost to the perceptive Padme, and she used some of her hypnotic abilities to counter the effect. This was not enough to push the corruption from their minds, and tapping the comlink on her wrist, her guardian angels rushed to her side and silently dragged the corrupt tendrils out of the senators. As they continued their discussions, Palpatine was furious at the resistance shown by the senators, and he now suspected that the angels had a power that threatened his plans. Returning to his office, he ordered Masamida to notify him of any suspicious activity, as he dispatched more to Iago to eliminate the threat of the angels. When the Zabrak was informed of the mission, he relayed this to Dooku, and it was time for the Count to make a move. Leaving his home planet for the world of Kamino, Dooku meets with the Prime Minister Lama Su, and after checking that the first batch of clones were ready, he ordered for a small squad to be deployed with Jango Fett, promising a large payment if he could stage an interception of Maul. Above the skies of Iago, Maul and the new clones managed to stage their fight, and in the presence of the Iagoans and Sazi Tin, who had been monitoring the planet, they returned to their respective planets. Just as Dooku wanted, the existence of these clones spreads quickly across the galaxy, as do the rumours that they had been created in secret by the Republic. If Palpatine had been furious before, he was now incandescent with rage, and attempting to find Dooku, who was one of the only people to know about the army, he found Dooku was unavailable. The Sith Lord was still seething as he returned to the Senate chamber to a series of jeers from the other senators, and before he could speak, Masamida asked Senator Amidala to address the Senate. In Palpatine's fury, he had forgotten about the Chagrian, and it seemed that the Angels had influenced him, as Padme called for a vote of no confidence. As the senators all moved towards the voting buttons in their repulsor pods, Palpatine had seen enough, and he quietly ordered into his comlink for the lights in the chamber to be dimmed. The senators looked around in panic, and if they had not been screaming, they may have heard the faint cackles of Palpatine as he moved the repulsor pods into each other to try and strike fear into the senators. The Sith Lord was forced to postpone his attack when the Angels rushed in from the surrounding corridors and illuminated the room with their presence, and he reverted back to the demeanour of another panicked senator. As the politicians gathered their thoughts and recovered, Grandmaster Yoda had been absorbing reports from the other Jedi who were confirming the evidence of Qui-Gon. Their meeting is broken when Yoda senses a flicker of the dark side, and this is followed by a desperate transmission from a group of Republic senators who had huddled together after the power cut. Yoda quickly boards a speeder to the Senate building, and by now, the presence of the dark side was hidden, but what he did not expect was the hologram of Count Dooku. Yoda saw the scowl on Palpatine's face, and Dooku began to list a series of accusations in his direction, from instigating the attack over Yago to manufacturing an army without the authority of the Senate. The Sith Lord needed all of his self-control to not unleash his rage at the betrayal, but in his effort, his Force cloak had slipped again, and this time Yoda was present to witness the error. Returning to the Jedi Temple, he found that Qui-Gon was waiting for the Grand Master with Anakin Skywalker, and though Yoda wanted to question why Anakin had not been brought to the temple, now was not the time for such discussions. Qui-Gon could sense that Yoda had deduced the identity of the Sith, and he proposed that they move for an arrest before Sidious escaped. Despite Yoda wanting more council members to tackle the Sith, he agreed with Qui-Gon, as they could prevent a war and the suffering of millions. The trio were accompanied by Battlemaster Sindralig, and boarding a Jedi shuttle to the Senate building, they saw Palpatine was still in his repulsor pod, trying to convince the Senate of his innocence. The Jedi each enter into a separate repulsor pod, and pointing their lightsabers in his direction, they declared him to be under arrest. It did not require all of Palpatine's considerable skills to tell him that the game was up, but he refused to allow 1,000 years of meticulously crafted Sith plans to go to waste. As he spoke casually about the legitimacy of the arrest, he attempted to dominate the mind of Anakin, who he thought was the weakest considering his age, but he was sorely mistaken. The young Skywalker manipulated his repulsor pod closer to the Sith, and with one Force-enhanced leap, he leapt onto Palpatine's pod. The Sith responded by jumping down to the bottom level, claiming the Jedi were trying to take over the Senate, and he tried to rush to a hidden exit. The Sith noticed the senators rush out of the arena, and unleashing his shining lightning attack, Master Dralig was sent into the chamber's wall. But as Yoda held off the next wave, Anakin cut the Sith's hands and placed stun cuffs around what remained. In the Galactic Court of Justice in Coruscant's Federal District, the judges which were appointed by Palpatine had been replaced by neutral representatives, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Palpatine attempted to cast the Jedi as the traitors, but evidence from senators such as Amidala Viego prevented any kind of last-minute manipulation. Given Palpatine's connection to the Force, it was agreed that the Sith would be imprisoned at the Jedi Temple's detention center, rather than the Republic's, and the combination of cortosis and duracrete amongst the cells, as well as defences such as laser gates and ray shields, minimised the chance of an escape. With Palpatine gone, Dooku had accomplished most of his original goals, which he set when he left the Jedi Order, and the presence of Qui-Gon had helped him from being corrupted by the dark side. Though he refused to join the Order, he decided to help squash the remainder of the corruption in the Senate, and the Separatists entered into a coalition with the New Republic. Padme Amidala had been highly expected to be nominee for Supreme Chancellor, but the Senator Viego decided to play a lesser role in politics to ensure the Angels resided peacefully. This role was delegated to Bail Organa, and he ordered the cloning program to directly assist the Jedi rather than the Senate, then reduced the power of commercial groups such as the Trade Federation, trying to guide the galaxy to a better place. After learning of Anakin's journey, from his training under the Angels to his guidance under Qui-Gon, the Jedi had a better understanding on all their Force sensitives. Rather than being too old to be trained due to their attachments, they would now allow them to be trained under the Angels, and the two factions were now loosely connected. With Maul returning to his brothers on Dathomir after their droid army had been deactivated, it meant that the last remnant of the Sith lineage had been broken, and the Republic would enter a golden era again.